Well, this is gonna be hella nerdy. Time to pull out the glasses. There we go. I need to make this clear before we start. This video is specifically for people who are spamming Windfield or Electric Shock. If you're below like 127 and grinding up fire mobs with just Poison Cloud, you're doing everything correct. Keep doing what you're doing and I'll see you back here once you're past August. Now for the rest of you, let's take an uncomfortably closer look at Poison Cloud, how it interacts with Herd, and how much value we're getting out of any of our weapon bonuses. So here I have an AoE of 29 mobs. I cast Sandstorm, Blizzard, Burning Field, and Lightning Storm in that order, then finish the AoE with Electric Shocks. Opener aside, it's a pretty standard AoE thing of just spamming one button. To get a closer look at what's actually happening, here on this chart I tracked every skill I used in order and how much damage each spell did, accounting for Herd. Waterbomb is subject to heavy RNG, so I opted to simplify it by only adding it when the sum of the proc rates added up to 100%. First thing I'll point out here is Herd order doesn't change. If a mob is taking 100% damage at the start of the AoE, it will continue to take 100% damage until it dies. This is why all the mobs in AoE never die at the same or even similar times. The damage isn't being evenly distributed. There is some weirdness if you gather more mobs without completely finishing the previous AoE, but I'm not going to touch on that here. Once the first 8 mobs die, all other mobs will be subject to less hurt damage reduction, but because the mobs have different amounts of HP, they're going to start dying off one at a time, which means mobs later in the Herd order will gradually take more damage. So what does this have to do with Poison Cloud? Well, Poison Cloud's dot is based on the damage of the initial hit. Like here, I pulled 29 mobs with a Poison Cloud that deals almost 38k damage. The 29th mob, however, only takes 4k from the initial hit and 2k on follow-up ticks. But because the dot damage already snapshotted, it won't do more damage when the other mobs die. So how does that look? Well, let's see here. And before you call me out, yes. Technically, the order of the skills used says Poison Cloud was used first, but because we're more interested in the ideal case, I gave Poison Cloud the 20% damage buff from Electric Shock. Here, you can see the first Poison Cloud does 605k damage across 29 mobs after accounting for Herd. Scroll more to the right, and fortunately the first dot tick happens before the mobs start dying, so the dot does 50% of the initial hit as it should. The problem shows up on the second tick, however. By the time we get to the second tick, all the mobs with the strongest dots already died, so the total damage of the second tick is already down to a third of the first. Next tick, it goes down again by more than half, and the pattern holds, and you see these last 2 ticks do less total damage than an Electric Shock does on a single mob. All of that ends up with this total damage chart where Poison Cloud doesn't really do more damage than any of your other skills, except the other skills are important for staying alive. Poison Cloud's only job is damage, and it's really not doing that job all that well. Compare that to the red-headed stepchild of elementor skills, Burning Field, where each tick is independent of the original damage, and they did the same amount of damage despite Burning Field doing much less on both the initial hit and dot ticks. Wait, no. I have water on my staff, and this is against water mobs. So, if I factor out the penalties against Burning Field and the damage bonus Poison Cloud is getting from the water upgrade, it looks more like this. So, we got some interesting numbers here. What do we do with them? Answer the question on the title of the video, of course. So, Poison Cloud is around 8% of your total damage, which means if you get a 25% awake, it'll only increase your overall damage by around 2%. 3.6% if you don't have a conch. This percentage goes down on longer AoEs where you cast Poison Cloud multiple times per pull like in Wells or Envy, because the initial hit will start to finish off mobs leaving only the weaker dots each time. If you get a 25% Burning Field awake, that'll increase your DPS by 3%, 5.5 if it's not a conch. This doesn't account for the fact that because Burning Field's tick damage is much lower than Electric Shock, it wastes far less damage whenever it finishes off a mob. That's, however, a much more involved calculation and not really relevant to finding the best awake, so moving on. 25% Electric Shock will add about 6.5% to your DPS, 12% without a conch. Windfield and Earthquake have higher end scaling than Electric Shock, so if you get 25% on either of those and use them as your filler, it'll increase your overall damage by 7.5%, 13% without waterbomb. An awake on any of the big 70 AoEs is worth 1.3% DPS. or 2.2% if it's not a conch. Of course, you should keep in mind that every mob's elemental resistance swings your damage more than any 25% awake, so depending on the mob, some skills just won't be worth using, which wastes the awake completely. Also, this is just for when you have max cast speed. As your cast speed goes down, your cooldown abilities take up a bigger share of your damage, while wind field and electric shock contribute less. You know, when I put it this way, none of the awakes sound all that interesting anymore. It's a good thing I have a 25% water well awake on mine, because Anchor will be a fire dungeon. Yep, you heard it here first. If you're not big on speculation though, consider getting Firebird for Wilds or Lightning Shock for Crichton. A 25% awake on either of those will increase your single target DPS by around 20%, after accounting for debuffing Electric Shock and the respective mage skill. So hopefully that answers your question, but there is one last thing I want to go over. We know Poison Cloud used in the way we discussed so far isn't the best use of it. So what does proper use of Poison Cloud look like? Let's take the damage written here as the example. Here we know Poison Cloud does 37k with Electric Shock, and the dot ticks 7 to 8 times, which means it does around 170k minimum to a mob if hurt isn't present. Looking at the end of the sheet here, we cast Poison Cloud at this point where the highest HP mob has 161k left. We can skip out on 4 casts of Electric Shock, which saves us around 2 seconds per AoE. Obviously gear and playstyle will factor into this, but personally when I was leveling last, I was taking 30 seconds from the start of an AoE to the end, so about 120 pulls an hour. If I can shave off 2 seconds from every AoE, I can do the same number of AoEs, but still have 4 minutes left on my amps. Enough time for another 8 AoEs, which would translate to around 6.7% more XP per hour. But of course, it's impossible to expect anyone to play perfectly, so let's say it's about the same as having a cheer for the entire hour since a cheer is worth 5%. That's pretty good, I'd say, which is rich coming from someone who never uses cheer.